His lecture. Social Engineering Toolkit. If you remember, I've already kind of given you a few lectures, a few demonstrations of the Social Engineering Toolkit in the previous lectures of this course. What exactly it is, I've never really kind of given you a formal definition. So let's go ahead and start with the formal definition. SET Toolkit is one of the world's most popular open source penetration testing tools that makes use of social engineering attacks like phishing attacks, site cloning attack, SMS spoofing, tab mapping, web jacking, and many others. It comes pre-installed with Backtrack and also with Kali Linux. How to access Social Engineering Toolkit? I think by now most of you are familiar with it, but why don't you take a look at the screenshot of Backtrack. So click on Applications, Backtrack, Exploitation Tools, Social Engineering Tools, Social Engineering Toolkit, and SET. If you're using Kali, then you'll have to do a quick search, and you'll still be able to pretty easily open up the Social Engineering Toolkit in Kali. So let's go ahead and start with the first type of attack that is possible using the Social Engineering Toolkit. And it's an attack known as Create Payload and Listener attack. The words payload and listener, they might actually sound quite familiar to many of you. If you remember the previous lecture where we discussed reverse shell attacks, bind shell attacks, meter-preter, MSF payload, listeners, and payloads are two concepts that we discussed very much in detail. Step number one, you open up SET, type 1 to select social engineering attacks. I'll go a little bit slow so that you know exactly what to type then. Then type 4 to select the create a payload and listener attack. Create a payload and listener attack. So select 4. Then it will ask you to enter the IP address for the payload, that is the reverse connection. So enter the IP address of the attacker where the listener will be running so that the victim can connect back to it. Right? So the payload IP means the IP address where the listener will run, that is the attacker's IP. Then you can actually even encode the whole payload, right? Encode the backdoor file essentially. So just the way we had seen in the previous lecture how you can use MSF encode to use encoding techniques like Shikata-Ganai or other encoding techniques to encode a backdoor file. Similarly, it is possible to encode a backdoor file even while using this create payload and listener attack. Now enter the port back to. So port 443 is by default. And now if you notice, the SET toolkit will encode the payload multiple times. And it will display the payload or display the backdoor file called msf.exe. It will create that file in the SET directory or SET folder, which is /pentest/exploits/SET. You can now copy this backdoor file and send it to the victim using email, chat, website, file sharing, or whatever. Just note down my own IP address because that is something that SET toolkit is going to ask me multiple times in throughout today's lecture. So if you notice, I typed ifconfig and my IP address has been mentioned. It is 192.168.27.128. This is the IP address. So I'm just going to kind of note it down so that I don't need to keep typing ifconfig again and again. So we're trying to execute the create payload and listener attack using social engineering toolkit. So I open up SET toolkit in Backtrack, or you can use Kali. So I type 1, then I type number 4 to select create a payload and listener attack. It is asking me to enter the IP address of the attacker, which in this case is 192.168.27.1. It is now asking me to select the payload. I want to select the second payload, which is Windows Reverse TCP Meterpreter. So I type number 2. Now it is asking me to select the encoding that I want to do. So let me just select number 15, which is the multi-encoder technique. Port is 443. So now you just got to patiently wait for a few minutes while it will backdoor the exe file and create it and store it in the SCD toolkit. So it will take a few minutes, and while it's kind of creating that file, let me open up the folder where that backdoor file will get created. So if you notice, it says encoding the payload multiple times to get around pesky antiviruses. So the encoding process has begun. See here. Then using MSF payload, MSF encode commands. Those commands are a little bit more advanced. You can do a little bit more advanced things with those commands, but then this is so simple. So the social engineering toolkit is extremely powerful. It is in the back end making use of Metasploit. But in the front end, you don't need to sit and remember the Metasploit commands and type them. If you notice, the encoding has now happened. Let me just show it to you. So it is using Shikata Ganai 4 times or 5 times initially. So 5 iterations of Shikata Ganai, then 2 iterations of alpha underscore upper, then Shikata Ganai again 5 times, and then countdown 5 times. The payload can be found in the set home directory. Right, so type number 3 to select credential harvester attack. Credential harvester attack. To use basically at this point it will ask you whether you want to clone an existing website or use one of the web templates. So we have seen this demonstration before in the course, so I think all of you understand the difference. Next, it is going to ask you to enter the IP address of the attacker where the username password has to be sent. So enter your own IP over here. So if you're choosing a template method, it will ask you to choose the exact website whose template you wish to choose, or if it's a site cloning attack, it will clone the website for you. And at this point, it's basically hosted a fake login screen or a phishing page of that website at your IP address. So you got to send this link, that is HTTP 192.168.27.128. Send it to your friend. Your friend clicks on the link. This fake login screen shows up. It looks exactly like the real login screen of Gmail. So your friend types the username password thinking that the username password is going to Gmail, but in reality the username password will be sent back to the criminal. And the best part is, after entering the username password, if all of you look at the screen very carefully, the victim has actually been redirected to the real website of Gmail or to the real Gmail server. So essentially what happens is the victim thinks that, oh, maybe there was an error, or maybe I entered the wrong username and password, but the victim will not even suspect that in reality he had entered the correct username password and the username password has actually been stolen and has actually been sent to the attacker's computer. So if you go back to the social engineering toolkit, you'll notice that the username password of the victim has actually been stolen. The username in this case is fadia.ankit and the password is afchdemo123.